Hello there and welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I'm your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Now today I have posed the question, why wear a hat? And it's a good question. You know, in this modern era, we have seen hat wearing fall into total abeyance for most men, all but the very few intentionally well-dressed men these days make use of the hat in their daily wardrobe. And there must be a reason for that. And we must ask ourselves, why should I wear a hat when nobody else is so doing? So I'm going to discuss that with you today. Perhaps, if we understand why hats are no longer worn, perhaps we can make a sort of argument why we should wear a hat. Because if you look back to any historic photographs from pretty much any period in history, other than from the 1960s onwards, you will find that all of those photographs, if they show groups of men, the man will generally be wearing some form of hat. He will be covering his head in some way because this was the pretty standard way that men dressed, as I say, right up to the 1960s. Now we have to ask ourselves, why have hats, such a practical and flamboyant item of clothing, why have they fallen into misuse in the modern era? And there are a number of reasons. I've given this quite some considerable thought. Now, the first reason why I think we wear far less hats than ever before is because of the rise of central heating and the way that we now control the climate in most of our lives. If you think back just a couple of generations ago to my parents' generation, my folks would often talk about exceptionally cold winters where people would struggle to keep warm all of the time. By comparison, our modern lifestyles are very soft. As I say, we live in almost entirely climate control environments all the time. So if we can control our body temperature, the hat, to a degree, loses an element of its usefulness within our wardrobe. And following on from that, the second reason why I think hats are less popular today than ever before, well, you have to say it's probably something to do with the increased use of personally owned vehicles. Because again, if you look a couple of generations past, you will find very few people owned a personal car. So they would use public transport. They would be travelling on the bus, on the train, on the tram. Or even looking further back at those historical photographs, people would be travelling on horses or walking everywhere. And as a consequence of that, you needed more protection from the elements as you were walking around. Or if you were queuing on a train platform or waiting at a bus stop for your omnibus to turn up. And as a result, when you need greater protection from the weather, you will tend to add things like hats to keep your head warm. Because your head represents a large portion of your body surface, which is open to the elements. And for sure, a large proportion of your body heat will ebb away through it if it's not insulated. And of course, the wearing of a hat insulates your head and keeps you warm. Now, another reason, my third reason why I think the use of headwear has fallen within gentlemen is because if you look, the hat started to lose popularity from about the 1950s and increasingly so as time went on. And there is historical sort of precedent here, because if you can imagine, many millions of men would have been conscripted into the armed forces, the military forces around the world for that period between the late 1930s and the mid 1940s. They would have been pressed into service during the Second World War. And as a consequence of serving in the military, you get issued with a uniform. In fact, I've got my old RAF uniform hat here, still clinging to life, merely as a memento these days, but I was issued that hat, and of course, when you're serving in the military, you're mandated to wear your hat pretty much all the time. It's an important part of the uniform. It allows you to recognise your comrades and, to show pride in your unit because you all wear a certain type of hat. Of course, men were forced to wear hats for several years. When they left the military, when they were demobbed and returned to civilian life, it is fair to say that many people eschewed the wearing of a hat because it reminded them of that uniform formality which they'd been forced into wearing during the Second World War. And for sure, if you look at history and the use of the hat, it starts to taper off at around about that time, because people had had a tootful of being forced to wear hats, and now they could choose whether to wear one or not, and they chose not to. Now, my next reason why I think people stopped wearing hats from sort of the mid-20th century and onwards up to the present day is the television. If we look at the television, it is, a medium for entertainment which is entirely controlled by aesthetics. It's what we see. It's a visual entertainment. And as people started to turn to that haunted fish tank, as it's sometimes called, for their primary entertainment within the home, we started to emulate the actors and the individuals who appeared on that television. And of course, for visual purposes, actors, celebrities, people who perform on the TV, they don't wear hats because, it impedes the view of the viewer of the individual's face. It means that the sort of framing of the person's head is more difficult to get into shot. So the hat, is totally sort of left out. And we as viewers, this is what we see. We are absolutely influenced by entertainment. And we look at those people no longer wearing hats, and we assume that is the way that we also should be dressing and be perceived by others. So certainly, that's one of the ways. And my final reason why I think the wearing of hats sort of tapered off, and I'm certainly not in that category anymore, but it's the increase of bouffant hairstyles for men. Now, if you look back into the 1960s and onwards, men start taking an interest in their hair in a way that they have never done so before. People start going to the hairdresser, having mullets and these spectacular hairstyles. They start putting product in their hair. And I think this is a point where the wearing of a hat becomes incongruous with your hairstyle. If you've spent some time styling your hair and you've put product in it, wax or whatever it may be, you're not going to spend time doing that, only then, to stick a hat on and find that your hairstyle has been ruined. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I think that the wearing of hats absolutely tapered off from the 1960s and onwards. Of course, the damage has been done. I think increasingly men are choosing short haircuts and less flamboyant haircuts, less bouffant haircuts, but we've got into that habit now. So whilst we don't sport many mullets these days, we have lost the regime of wearing hats in our daily lives. Okay, so now we have an understanding of why men have chosen to wear less hats than they ever have in the history of our style journey ever before. Now we understand why we're not wearing hats. Now I think it's time to pose that question again. Why wear a hat? Let me now argue for the place of the hat in the sartorial man's wardrobe. Because let's be honest, if we walk down the street today in any typical town, and I'm in, England, quite a sartorially elegant part of the world in many respects, you will not see somebody wearing a classic hat. You will most likely, if you see a hat at all, it will be the king of hats, the baseball cap, which seems to have usurped all the other hats which are out there at the moment. And sadly, with the rise of the baseball cap has come the decline of these classic hats that I have with me here. And some of these hats have great utility. They have great purpose. They are superb at their task, but now many men pass them by because to wear one of these hats would make you stand out a little, and you might be self-conscious of that. I'm joined today by some remarkable hats which really do make a fabulous style statement for the gentleman wearing them. The Homburg hat, one of my absolute favourites. This particular example, a gift from my very good YouTube friend Timothy Big Pretty Crow, what a classic hat. Admittedly, somewhat difficult to wear in the modern era out and about without standing out from the crowd. But, you know, a hat, a Homburg, and I've got a non-decorated version here. The Homburg, of course, the favoured hat of Winston Churchill. A classic, elegant utility hat. It's warm, it's comfortable, it's the sort of thing that a gentleman can wear in any situation. The Trilby over here, the workhorse of my hat collection. A hat which I often reach for in the winter time because it is comfortable, it is warm, again being made of wool, it's small in stature, so it's not sort of overly flamboyant that it makes you conscious of dressing unusually in a crowd. Perfect for the winter, and if you're in the summertime, you just choose one made of straw, paper, or whatever other material you should wish. The bowler hat, the classic hat for the British gentleman. Very much associated with formality, with style, and with function, but actually an incredibly useful and versatile hat. More bowler hats were worn in the Old West in the USA than any other type of hat because they were practical, they were very hard wearing, tough, created by Lock & Son in London, a fabulous addition to the gentleman's wardrobe. The flat cap, my utility hat of choice for most days. Where other people may reach for a baseball cap, for me, the flat cap is my day-to-day hat of action. And there is a bit of an outlier here other than my military cap, but the fez. Now, you know, a bit of a red herring, bit of a joke here. You know, I would like to say that at the end of a hard day at work, I come home, I don my, my velvet smoking jacket, I put on my fez, and I sit in my drawing room with my good lady wife and partake of a pipe of rough shag. But the truth is, this is just a novelty hat I bought for my son for a World Book Day costume a while ago, so just visiting us here today. But all of these hats have been usurped by that awful baseball cap. But there are some really good reasons why you should consider wearing a classic hat and adding one to your collection. Now, the number one reason why I think you should is utility. All of these hats are better at their function than the baseball cap. All of them. If you look at any of the hats on the front row, the larger brimmed hats, the Homburg, the Trilby, the bowler, functionally they are superb. They are evolved over centuries, in some cases, to the finest evolution of what a gentleman's hat can be. The brim protects one's head from the rain, the elements. It keeps your eyes shaded from the sun. They're all generally made of wool or some other form of woolen type material, felt or whatever, and they are warm, they are comfortable. They fit the head perfectly, so it doesn't get any risk of it blowing off. There are so many positive reasons why one of these hats is better than the baseball cap, unless you're actually playing baseball. So certainly, that's my number one reason. Utility. They are good at their job. Now, the other reason why I think you should choose a classic dress hat instead of the other more informal choices you could make is they do several things for you as a gentleman in the way that you dress. The first thing they do without even trying. They add height. Now, I'm going to put on a typical bowler hat, the classic gentleman's hat if you live in this country, and it immediately adds 3 inches to my height. It makes me more imposing. It makes me stand out in a crowd. It is such a useful item if you want to, be recognizable. If you imagine, this is the very reason why military soldiers wear hats, part of their uniform. Think of, the household guard in the royal family. British Army soldiers, they wear those tall Busby hats made of bearskin, and they add about a foot to your height. And you can imagine when those hats were sort of primarily in use, 17th, 18th, 19th century, you could imagine an army of men advancing towards you with those large bearskin hats, standing up. Most of them would have been over 6 feet tall. From a distance, it's so much more domineering of the battle space. They would have looked frightening, imposing. And that's one of the very good reasons why a gentleman should wear a hat today. The wearing of a hat gives you height, it makes you, gives you more consequence and a sense of presence. Now, the other thing that a hat does for you when it's on your head, it hides many of your insecurities. Now, if you're a gentleman such as myself, who's somewhat bereft on the follicle front, say you've gone prematurely bald, and that's conscious, it's something you're concerned about. For me, I went bald when I was in my 40s. It doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I quite like having short hair. It doesn't cause me any concern. But I know there are some people for whom this causes many, self-assurance issues. They feel, insecure about the fact that they've lost their hair. While you're wearing a hat, nobody knows you've lost your hair. It covers up that thing which you feel less secure about. So that's one of the advantages of wearing a hat. You lose many of the insecurities which you may have about your hair. Now, another reason why I think the hat's a great addition is it finishes off your outfit. Now, of course, being a stylish gentleman and somebody who's interested in this topic, I often see people, and I watch other YouTubers who are remarkably well dressed. They are what I often describe as intentionally well-dressed men. They have gone to finite detail to make sure their outfits are well finished and they look great, but they don't dress their head. And as I say, this is a big part of your physical presence. And by putting on a hat, shall we say the trilby, a simple little hat like a trilby, it really finishes off your outfit. It just makes you go from top to bottom, showing that you've made every little bit of effort. And I think some formal outfits, I did a video recently about dealing with death, and I wore my bowler hat with a black overcoat to sort of express the formality perhaps of attending a funeral and dealing with a situation of that nature. When I look at that video now, myself wearing the black overcoat, the black bowler hat added to that outfit brings such somber presence to that overall ensemble of clothing. There is no mistaking its intent of showing grief and condolence when you would be at a funeral of something. So I think the hat finishes off your outfit. If you wanted flamboyance, of course, you could choose a hat which represents that and demonstrates that too. So it doesn't have to be all sobriety and sadness. It can be excitement and happiness too. But yes, absolutely. And another thing, when you wear a hat, you provide a fabulous accessory for things like etiquette too. So when you're walking down the street, you tip your hat to a lady coming the other way. It is, certainly a sign, a gesture of great politeness and an enhanced sense of etiquette, which you can perform, which you're not able to do if you're not wearing a hat. I often wear a hat to Remembrance Day parades on that special Sunday in November every year, where we join together in the sort of communal act of remembrance for fallen warriors. And of course, when you wear a hat, it allows you to remove your hat at the moment of remembrance. So it gives you a tool, an accessory, which can be played in your game as a gentleman. It's something which very few people consider when they think about wearing a hat. And don't forget, my final reason why I think a gentleman should add a hat to his collection or his daily wear is it increases your level of gravitas. Because when you think back in history, we associate many of the most famous people in the world with the hats that they wore. When I think of a Homburg hat, I immediately think of Winston Churchill. When I think of, some of the other great heroes of our time, David Lloyd George, First World War Prime Minister, I think of him wearing his top hat. Abraham Lincoln, how can you not picture him in your mind if he's not wearing his top hat? Humphrey Bogart, the trilby. James Bond, the trilby too. So many famous celebrities, actors, characters have personified themselves with the wearing of a hat. Laurel and Hardy. Who cannot think of Laurel and Hardy without thinking of the bowler hat? It very much became the embodiment of their their characters on the big screen. So yes, certainly, if you can carve out a niche for yourself as somebody who enjoys wearing a hat, that may be your logo, the thing that you are remembered by. And in fact, the logo I use for the Chap's Guide channel is of me wearing my bowler hat. So it just goes to show they still have a place in identifying you with a certain level of etiquette and of sartorial elegance. Okay, gentlemen, so there we go. Those are my reasons why we've stopped wearing hats and why I think we should start wearing hats. Never forget, the hat is most certainly a symbol of one's status in life. You know, when you think about things like a crown, the very embodiment of the British nation is the crown. And, you know, it's a hat which is worn by our head of state. So, you know, I can think of no greater example of why the hat has such an important place in the way that we dress. If you're thinking about wearing a hat, why not start small and move upwards? Put your baseball cap away, move up to a nice flat cap, easy to wear, very versatile. You can just wrap it up, put it in your pocket, it's there when you need it. You will find it protects your head wonderfully and it adds a little bit of character to the way that you dress. In the summertime, instead of a baseball cap, go for a little trilby. This is a paper trilby, but perfect for keeping the sun out of your eyes and off the back of your head and neck. And then, when your confidence grows, move up the levels of formality. A trilby, I have to say, for me, a trilby is the sort of Swiss Army hat because it's good for pretty much every occasion. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's not too flamboyant. It just ticks the box. If you've nailed that and you're ready to move on, well, then the Homburg and the bowler lie in wait for you. And if you are a very brave gentleman, well, the fez is always there if you really want to stand out from the crowd. But then you may need to start watching another channel because that's another story entirely. Okay, gents, I hope you've enjoyed this talk today about why I think you should wear a hat. If you've enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up. If you're not already a subscriber, you know the drill. Click the red button, come on the journey with us. And if you'd like to practically support the channel, you can buy me a coffee. You'll find a link to our Buy Me a Coffee page in the show notes below. And don't forget to leave me a message in the comment section. I love to hear what you think about my observations on men's style down below. Leave me a question. I might even turn it into a video. So, until the next time, let me put on one of my favourite hats. Until the next time, take care of yourselves, look sharp in your hat, and I will see you again very soon.